Good evening, and welcome to the second edition of Deliberative Democracy. We also have with us tonight Carl Scala, who is affiliated with the Counterpoint program here on CAT TV, and we've kind of decided that what we're going to do is have some episodes where we combine what we do and then have others where we might be separate. So I'm happy tonight to have three guests with me, and we're going to talk a little bit about the Columbia visioning process. I won't take any more time. I'll let the guests go around and introduce themselves and let us know which citizen topic group they were a part of.
You want me to go first, Keisha?
Absolutely,
All
Larry.
right.
You go for it.
All righty. I was a part of the Governance Structure Committee, and it was something I was asked to do. Like many of us, my time is very full, and I was reluctant to do it, but I volunteered, and I'm very pleased that I did it.
I am too.
And I'm Susan Marshall Roberts, and I was on the topic group that was originally called Community Facilities and Services, but we changed the name, although you'll see when we went to do the voting it stayed the same, but to Law Enforcement, Public Safety, Public Works, and Libraries. So we had 4 areas.
Okay.
My name's Carl Scala. I'm the 3rd Ward City Council member. I was elected in April 3rd actually. I participated in most of the visioning processes in February and March. I was assigned to the Development Subcommittee, and was pleased to see that some of the ideas before the election were starting to receive some support. So I was removed later once I was elected, because I was no longer eligible for the visioning committee, but followed the process quite closely, because I think it was a tremendous opportunity for the City of Columbia to develop ideas in terms of where the direction that they wanted to go.
Okay. And I failed to mention that my name is Kisha Duncan, as you all know by now, and also a part of the Governance and Structure Citizen Topic Group. So Larry and I got to know each other real well through that work on the Governance Citizen Topic Group. Been a lot of talk recently since the Community Choices workshop last Thursday about the blue dots.
And the
Never
voting,
thought there would be so much talk about blue dots in the.
they're kind of like hanging chads, aren't they?
They really are. We've taken on a kind of a whole new meaning with those dots in the voting process. Are you all aware of how that's kind of gone, and do you have particular feelings about it if you're in the know about the blue dot dilemma?
Yes, but
Yeah.
Anybody jump in and
I have some strong opinions about it.
speak first?
Fill us in on the blue dot dilemma. I knew we used the blue dots to vote, and it was a way to prioritize things, and that was part of the whole process, is that trying to develop some community priorities.
Apparently there were some discrepancies about being issued the blue dots when individuals arrived at the ballroom to do their voting. Beforehand, there were directions printed on the website indicating that people could use their 6 dots and vote for one strategy with each blue dot. But upon arriving, it turned out that people decided to collect their blue dots and put all 6 on a particular strategy or goal, and there were some
Oh, so
folks
you're only
that took
supposed to vote
issue
for
with
one,
that.
but they wanted to.
Well,
There's some controversy
We really
about
didn't
that.
know that. Let me give you my take on this
Okay.
issue. I arrived at the ballroom at about 3 o'clock or so,
Okay.
and everybody was allocated their 6 blue dots. And there were, across the aisle, there was another series of materials that suggested what people could do. I mean, these are materials that suggested what all of the goals were and what all the strategies were. They were also indicated on all of the easels in the room. There were no instructions given to anyone, certainly not to me, when I went to get my 6 blue dots. I was simply given my 6 blue dots. I had kind of a previous knowledge and had the privilege of having some indication from the city that the blue dots were to be used as a ranking of 6 top priorities.
Okay.
to indicate which one of those strategies were the most important to you. But that was not the information that was given to anyone who came to get their blue dots at the table. There was no indication of what was going on, actually. So I was there for about a half an hour or 45 minutes. I got my blue dots, assumed that I was going to make my 6 choices based on a ranking, and ranked the 6 strategies that I thought were the most reasonable to me. But while I was there, I witnessed lots of folks coming, not getting any instructions as to how they were supposed to use their blue dots, but using their blue dots on particular strategies, all 6 of their blue dots on a particular strategy. I guess the problem I have with that is, I mean, that's the fault of ACP and not adequate instruction in terms of letting people know what it was they were supposed to vote on. And I think what it tends to do is tends to narrow the number of interesting ideas that needs to be put out there. I'm not saying it's illegal. I mean, it's certainly possible, and usually when you get your blue dots, I mean, you can use your blue dots any way you want to, and you may even want to use all of them in one particular place or another, unless you're given instructions to the contrary. But there were lots of folks that were putting all of their blue dots on particular areas, and my problem with that is it tends to narrow the number of strategies that we need to deal with in terms of how the city needs to move forward. And my inclination is to suggest that we ought to abandon that idea about the ranking idea, about the business about an ordinal scale and what's number 1 and what's number 6. What we ought to think about is where the most votes, and this is like 500 people, so this is only one aspect of how people are voting on this visioning thing.
Sure.
But we ought to start thinking about the categories, those 13 categories that were important in the first place, as to where it is that the city wants to go and what categories, not just strategies, are more important to moving the city ahead.
Okay.
Well, there were instructions, and there were printed instructions, and we got these. But I know in our topic group, when was being talked about at the very last one about what this was going to be, we were extremely concerned about this process, just because of what you're saying, Carl, and also because some of the topic groups were quite large, like development and some others. Ours was tiny. Our whole group, it's only 7 people.
Right.
And we had 4 different areas to deal with, one of which was libraries, which is kind of out of the realm of the city anyway. I mean, we had Melissa Carr in there, but the library board runs the libraries. And but we had law enforcement, we had public safety, we had public works, with a lot of important issues. And yet, you know, with development of 80 people? So if 80 people walk in with 6 blue dots, put them all over there, it's just going to be swamped, and we were concerned about that. We were concerned about non-direction from the consultants all the way, and the changing of the rules. And we were a positive group, and we worked really hard, but there was a lot of, I mean, I know I'm lumping a whole lot of things at once, but
Well, I think the thing with the
changing
consultant,
rules,
well, the changing the rules and the lack of clarity, I think we all struggled with that. And for what we paid for that, I would have liked to seen the consultant actually show up in the groups. You know, they were at the big meetings,
I agree.
but they weren't involved. And
No.
and hats off to the local volunteers that ran those. My gosh, their hands were full. But that's not something that they do on a daily basis. And for them to just receive an afternoon's training for that, I think was unfair to them. They did the very best they could, but some of the groups were, you know, a bit contentious, and trying to work these kind of things out are not easy.
Right.
And when you could boil it all down, it was amazing how common most people's goals were. We had so many things in common.
Yes.
That-
Yes.
But
Absolutely.
what this should have done is brought us together some, and
Yes.
it kind of helped maintain the schisms, you know. And as a councilman, one of the things that I learned in my term as that councilman was that the people are better at finding loopholes than we are at writing laws and ordinances. And basically what you had there was, a set of rules, poorly or better communicated, I don't know, but people are going to find ways to work around things to accomplish the things that they want. And what came out of the whole thing to me was to look some of these people in the eye, meet Keisha, see you in the halls and things like that. Carl and I cross swords fairly often, but it's respectable.
Reasonable swords.
Well, razor sharp for sure, though, so you better keep it up there. But there's got to be a place where we can move on. And stacking the deck, stacking the votes, I think that's pretty normal human behavior. And I think sometimes probably it demonstrates a little bit of the frustration people have in the community and their efforts at how important they think it is to be heard, and what can we do to push what we believe is important. So
I think one of the issues here is that we never really questioned ACP very closely. I mean, we accepted. I mean, I don't know how this all came about exactly, but in the initial phases, we just accepted that they had great success in Chattanooga and a few other places, and we assumed that their great success meant that they knew exactly what they were doing, and this was all going to fall into place, and so on and so forth. I think we've come to the conclusion. There was an early in this process when they first had the 1,500 ideas, which I thought was terrific. When they got all these groups together to get all of these ideas, and then they narrowed this focus down to 13 general categories. And I'm sure that was simply statistics. It was cluster analysis. So you get these things down. So you reduce them down, because eventually you're going to have to reduce them down, because realistically, the city council, who is eventually going to have to act on this, is going to have to deal with 2 or 3 or 4 issues. So ultimately you do. But even then, early in this process, there was a lot of unrest, so to speak. I remember talking to Diane Drainer and Jeff Williams too, saying, you narrow these 1,500 issues down to 13 categories, there's going to be a lot of people are going to be unhappy, and they were. And then when you narrow them down in even further from 13 categories to all of these strategies within the categories, to vote on strategies, I think that was an issue too.
Well, and then a problem was walking around and looking at different groups. Like some groups had strategies very specific, where our interpretation of trying to follow the consultants was a strategy was something big, and then the specific things are the action plan, what you're going to do to get to it, like equitable police enforcement.
That's where the consultant, being more hands-on, would have a lot of input into that, because I think we struggled with it.
We did.
And I wouldn't see any other group being anything different, because the definitions of what's a strategy and what's a...
But we didn't have much contact.
We didn't have any contact, really.
We didn't have much contact with the consultant, actually.
No.
I mean, they just appeared every once in a while for these big meetings.
Mostly the referee.
And then they just threw papers at us, and we didn't know what was at the end, and they changed the rules. They didn't just change the rules.
I'd be curious to see what the folks in Chattanooga thought. I never asked that question. I guess I should have asked that question. People
I did a little reading
presented
on the
this in
Chattanooga
terms
thing. I stumbled across some information a couple of years ago. Well, it's through business as a customer that was involved with that, and gave me a bunch of stuff to read, so I read it. It's like, well, if we could do something like this, like they did in Chattanooga, because what excited me, what Chattanooga did, was the community came together, and it was a huge public works building project.
Right.
I mean, they developed the riverfront, they
big
had a
riverfront
zoo.
economic development
I
kind
see.
of thing.
Okay.
That's
Right.
exactly
And
right.
Chattanooga is a city that's completely different than Columbia. Chattanooga is a working class town. They wanted jobs. They wanted to put people to work.
Yeah.
And that was a very important thing. And that strategy of the public works projects and people getting behind it developed a lot of pride, and they were willing to dig into their pockets to pay for it and generate the jobs and work within. You take Columbia, we're a standalone college town. You can't hardly compare us to very many other cities. We're loaded up with more idea people than the average community. And one of our biggest challenges that I think probably the consultant was responding to in narrowing everything down is that we talk too much. In this community, we spend a lot of time talking, and we can spend a whole lot more time. And it's good, but there's a point where you need to start moving forward and doing some things, and all that information is there, and it'll never go
Well,
away.
no, but they took away the implementation plans because they said, oh, this is optional, and I'd been told before I got on this by 2 people who are now on the city council that the major thing to do in order to see this happen is to make sure to have implementation written in. Our group, and I guess 3 others out of the however many, maybe 4, 6, wrote implementation, and the consultant at the end decreed that the implementation was going to be eliminated because not all the groups wrote implementation.
Well,
and I think that's
the process
ridiculous.
is pretty confusing. I mean,
Well,
you can get into
It's
the
was
whole
very
thing.
straightforward. It's right there. It said implementation. And we you know,
I
there are
think
groups
part-
that did that,
Well,
so
isn't that
that's
what the
being
action plans
lost.
were? Is how do you
No.
accomplish what you
Yes,
want
it's how
to?
you
I think
accomplish, but
part
then
of
it's
the-
how you see how it's going to be implemented and how to measure.
Well, I'd like to think we're
5
intelligent
years,
people here,
10
but it sure seems
years.
confusing.
Well,
Is
I
it
don't
any
think
wonder
it is
that
because
we
that's
can't
my
get
field research.
If it is,
You have to have measurements.
if it is confusing, and I agree with you that it has been a tad confusing, if it is confusing, that seems to fall on the consultant that we paid lots of money to do this with.
As we normally
And I
do.
suspect that I guess I should have looked into the Chattanooga thing a little bit more. I don't know. I haven't talked to anybody in Chattanooga. And I'm thinking that this group, this ACP group, not that they're not talented. I'm sure they have lots of talent. They spend a lot of money doing this, and they've organized the whole thing. But I think they're more end-centered than mean-centered. In this community, we're more process-oriented. The idea of people that
Oh,
you're
absolutely.
talking
Where
about
Right.
how
is all
things
about
happen.
how it happens, not just where we eventually wind up. And I think that may be the problem that we've had with this thing.
Well, the whole thing seemed rushed.
Well,
You
It's a
mean,
very rushed
right.
process.
and, you know, and
And-
from a city council perspective these days, and I don't want to, I'm talking here as a citizen, not necessarily as a city council member, because eventually this stuff is going to wind up in our lap. But as a city council member, some of the policy decisions that we have been charged to make because we've been elected have been on hold pending this visioning process, and I understand that. I mean, you kind of have to get a feel for where people are coming from in order to make effective policy. But I'm not sure it's been as effective as it could be, given the leadership and the amount of money that we paid the consultant to make this process effective for our community. I think they're too end-centered and not enough mean-centered, and I think that's
what does that
we
mean,
need.
Carl?
Well-
In-centered versus mean-centered. Sounds like some statistical analysis.
It sort of is.
And then when I think of statistics, I think of
Let
Mark
me,
Twain.
Statistics
let me,
are
sug-
good.
let me suggest
They
to
can
you
be
a,
good.
They can be.
a
If they're used
solution
properly.
for example, this last meeting that we had 500 people, and that's a good thing. I'm glad 500 people participated. I don't care who they are. I think participation is better than non-participation. But the idea that you can pick apart these strategies within these 13 goals, which you've already minimized, I think is a mistake. We should not have, the instruction should not have been that we were going to rank these things from 1 to 6. Frankly, people didn't even do that because sometimes they put all of their 6 dots on one thing. But the ranking should have
blue dot
disappeared.
dilemma.
What we should have done is we should have considered this on a nominal scale. And a nominal scale means, in statistics, yes and no. An ordinal scale means 1 to 6, and 1 is better, 6
So it's a
times
ranking
better than
scale.
1. It's a ranking scale. We should have abandoned the ranking scale. We should have used a nominal scale, and we should have said, this is what I'm interested in. Yes, I'm interested in this. No, I'm not interested in this. And then at least we'd have wound up with 6 topics, big topics, the goals that we could have talked about. And ultimately, the city council is going, and the sponsors.
Well, I suppose
count-
we could direct the purchasing, or the council could go
Well,
back and we could vote on this thing, present it all again and
Well,
have a
we
different
could.
voting.
We could.
I mean, it would be probably nothing more than a matter
Well,
of some.
another interesting thing
an
was
idea.
this vote
With
was
more
held on
people.
Rosh Hashanah. So there were a lot of Jewish votes that didn't
Yeah.
even count because they didn't even show up. So it's good that there were 500 people that showed up for this thing, but now we ought to have more than one event
Right.
to have people
Well,
cast their
originally,
votes.
what we were told by, because Louisa Rungfine was our facilitator. We only had one because our group was too small. And the whole idea is whoever was facilitator, co-facilitator was supposed to be neutral, period. And that is what was happened in our group. She was neutral. And none of the rest of us wanted to do that because we had 3 people out of the 4 who only wanted to work on libraries. And then it became just 3 left. So the 3 of us had to work on law enforcement, public safety, public works. We couldn't. But what I was going to say is they made a lot of mistakes with putting things on holidays or wanting to put them when people weren't in town. And what she had heard, though, originally was that this was going to take place over about 5 days, 4 days, much
Oh, the voting.
more voting time. And so when this happened, it, you know, just suddenly, all these things kept getting changed. And we weren't allowed, because we, from our committee, wanted to, we would send feedback through Louisa. But they had, early on, people were contacting Jeff and Diane, and they shut that down, you know, just shut that down.
I was disappointed that we didn't stop then
Then why would we have a meeting?
and reconvene as a
Like you were
large group
talking
and
about
discuss
that.
when that distrust began right from the onset. Let's get back together, reconvene, and talk about how this is feeling for folks and how we could get back on track. But once we were off the track, we were off the track.
Well, despite, you know, we have a tendency as a community to focus on how it could have been better. And I really work, I don't know if it's because I'm a small businessman and I've fought that thing for 20 plus years, but we need, one of the things that I think we need to do as a community is learn to take the long view and recognize that as academicians and highly educated people, we have a tendency to always want the best, look for how can we improve it, and that's good, but it can also just put us in neutral, and we fail to accomplish anything, and we have it great. And there is as much as we can complain about the consultant, and if we were going to do it again, we have a tremendous experience. If they were really interested, we could make some really good suggestions for the next community, or if we go through a round 2. But there are a lot of good things that came out of it, and I think it's easy for us and to focus on things that could have been better, and we really ought to be focusing on the fact that we got 500 people together. We have 13 ideas. We've got enough on our plate that if we really pursued it, we would really, it'll take a long time to implement a
Where
lot
did
of
we
it.
get 13 ideas?
I
Where
have-
is it
Or the
things
13
could-
groups.
Is it that things could have been better, or is it that I think you're letting them off the hook a little bit there, because we were simply asking for the rules that were presented to be followed as they were stated. And when that didn't happen, and then didn't happen a second time and a third time, if we can't trust them through this first part of the process, how are we going to trust them when it's time to do the real work?
Okay, but that's history. I mean,
Yeah.
we've
Well,
already been beyond that. Now, what
That's
we
kinda
need-
my point
What
is-
we really need to focus
Well-
on now is making this process better. And we have an opportunity, given that some mistakes were made, no question about it. Some good things came out of this whole process.
absolutely. I'm not
Carl's
disputing
idea,
that.
though,
What
your
we really
idea
need
of
to
going
do is
back
move
and the
forward
yes
and
and
improve
no,
it.
and not thinking that these certain
know,
small things that were picked out, because
Frankly,
it was very
the
confusing.
city council is going to decide on the basis of some of these 13 categories. I mean, I have no doubt. I mean, this is not, we're not going to be taking a look at specific strategies. These will inform the debate, and they will inform the decision as to whether or not which strategies go forward. It's pretty clear that there was an environmental strategy that came out of this thing, and there was an economic, at least an economic
Yes.
vitality issue
Yes.
that came out of it. I think both of those things are incredibly important in this town, and I think both of those things will get some backing. So that will happen. But what we have to figure out is how to make this process better from right now,
Right.
right now forward. Don't worry about
Well, are
whether
we-
it didn't work out or whether people put their votes in the wrong place and all the rest of it. We can fix it and make it work better
There
from
was
now
talk
on.
about
If we
committees.
can fix it, then that
about
sounds at
committees
least
following
somewhat
up.
salvageable.
It was
on
very
different-
salvageable.
Sure.
One of the things that I noticed as the visioning committee was working is that the council was already ahead of the curve, so to speak, and starting to work on a lot of things. You know, the mayor had already put a police review type
Sure.
exploratory committee together. There were several other things along economic development and environmental standards. And we have a tendency to, as people, we have a tendency to want it and want it now. And we forget that a lot of this is a process, and that we have to look back and see that things change, they change for the better, and we grow and that we learn. And I think we've grown a lot. I think this process was incredibly valuable, and I was very much of a skeptic about it. I thought, oh, well, one more committee, one more task force.
We had that in common anyway.
Yes, we do.
But lots
but
of people got their viewpoints across, at least in the initial part of this thing, and I think that will all be considered. And
Absolutely.
none of this stuff is forgotten.
The biggest thing is, you said something about process, and it's just so important that people have the opportunity to be involved, to voice their opinion, to go
Empowerment
say
is what
attaboy,
it's all about.
say attaboy
Yeah,
or
it's-
complain. Unfortunately, when we talk about the opportunity to be involved and voice opinions, it's because we've got a gripe. And I think when we temper that with attaboys and look around, then you start to see a little bit more clear picture that, yes, this needs a lot of work. You know, this is functioning pretty well, and we've started working on this already, and you know, our wind energy efforts, our recycling programs. I think we're way ahead of the curve on a ton of things.
I don't think it's...
I'm sorry to cut
Oh,
you off,
I'm sorry.
Mr. Scala. We have about 1 minute left. Final thoughts. I'd like to ask each of you quickly, do you plan to stay involved when you filled out your comment cards at the ballroom? Did you agree to stay involved on some level? And if so, do you plan
It's
to?
a sickness, it's a curse. Once involved, always
I
involved.
take it that means yes on your comment card.
Yes.
I put down yes because there's a lot of information that we gained that I've been working on because I was on the Bicycle and Pedestrian Commission years ago, and that had been working on trying to get years and years and years, and finally got it in there. And I don't want that to be lost. And I want people to follow, that we keep progressing like you're talking about. So,
Mr. Scala, you
Well,
have the final word.
I guess I don't have any choice. I have to be involved. Too, because
Are you going to resign?
Yeah.
We always have an
It's
option.
not likely. I agree. But the point is, I mean, I think we need to forget about I mean, we don't need to forget about it. We need to acknowledge what mistakes we may have made, but we need to put the mistakes in the past and move forward and make this the best process we can. We've been waiting on policy decisions for a long time. We've been waiting on the visioning process. To Bill Watkins' credit, he has put this on the forefront of the burner. I think it's very important, and the council thinks it's very important. We will act on it, and we will consider all of these 1,500 ideas that the people put forward in the first place.
That's a good
Yes,
place. That's a
1,500,
good place
that's
to
a good
stop.
place to look.
Mr. Scala, Dr. Roberts, Larry Schuster, thank you all three for joining us.
You're welcome.
Thank you for this edition
Thank
of
you.
Deliberative Democracy.